HTC seems to finally be back on track with the HTC 10, though whether it's too little too late remains to be seen. The trademark aluminium machined body is still there, but now with larger, even ergonomic chamfers, plus what looks to be a decent 12 megapixel rear camera with f over 1.8 aperture, plus OIS and laser autofocus. And for the first time ever, the front-facing camera has optical image stabilization too, with a 5 megapixel sensor and f over 1.8 aperture, not shabby at all. The boom sound name is still around, but instead of stereo speakers, the earpiece works as a tweeter. Yeah, right. And the bottom of phone speaker, a woofer. Yeah, right again. This is HTC though, so the audio won't be terrible, but don't kid yourself, this will be stereo or balanced. Control buttons are now more standard with a fingerprint sensor and the central home button. Tech specs include a 5.2-inch QHD LCD screen, a Snapdragon 820 chipset with 4GB of RAM, with a choice of 32 and 64GB of storage, plus micro SD, of course. Inside is a 3000 mAh battery that can be charged up to 50% in 30 minutes, thanks to Quick Charge 3.0. It's hard to deny that the Huawei P9 here is a thing of beauty. The chamfered aluminium, the 2.5D glass, the glossy black camera island have all been done before, but there's a certain holistic sense of completeness here that's exuded by Huawei's latest flagship. The P9 is certainly up near the competition from Samsung and LG, but it's also not quite as inexpensive as we're used to seeing from this Chinese brand. Huawei's P range is effectively its flagship line, perhaps P for premium, and the P9 follows where the P8 left off, impressing hugely in the hand by being thinner and lighter than a smartphone has any right to be, especially considering the specifications here, including a 3000 mAh battery and a realistic time between charges of 2 days. We've seen aluminium frames before, of course, but Huawei has produced a stunner here. The combination of curved glass at the edges for ease of swiping, neat chamfers front and back, plus gentle curves on all four corners, all make the P9 a pleasure to hold securely and comfortably. The fingerprint sensor on the back is well positioned and very fast in operation to power on the screen and unlock in a split second. Plus, this being Huawei, there are some neat gestures that you can do on the sensor with any finger. The usual swipe down for the notification shade, or swiping left and right when in the built-in gallery application, perhaps while showing off some of the photos you've taken. The bottom is host to a USB Type-C port. This is thankfully starting to come into mainstream smartphones in a big way now, and I'm all for it. Type-C is so much more capable, usable and robust than micro USB. The P9 is nominally rated at charging at 2 amps at 5 volts through this port and comes with an equivalent charger. This charge is fast enough, but I note that other Type-C equipped devices, Nexus 5X, Lumia 950, can go up to 3 amps at 5 volt. It's not clear whether this is a software, a budget or a hardware limitation of the P9. Also down at the bottom is a speaker grill covering a mono loudspeaker of decent volume and depth. Here's a demo. Nothing wrong with this at all, apart from not being stereo. The distinguishing feature of the P9, though, is the camera island, similarly styled to that on the Nexus 6P, also made by Huawei, except that here there are 2 camera lenses, each f over 2.2, so not that fast by 2016 standards, but one with a monochrome sensor behind it and one with a standard color unit. The theory here is that the extra detail and luminance data from the monochrome sensor is used to enhance the clarity and accuracy of the color one, but now for the Emperor's New Clothes moment. In my tests, alternately covering the monochrome unit and then exposing it again, I couldn't tell the difference. In any light conditions, I'm not convinced by Huawei's marketing here. Maybe there are software updates needed. I suspect the monochrome is currently only used when taking explicit monochrome shots and when using the interesting shallow depth of field mode. Here, each camera is preset with an optimized focal point, and the distance between the 2 lenses and some clever imaging software is used to combine the 2 images to focus on a specific point, and with a slider available to vary how much parts of the image away from the focus point are artistically blurred. Keep up at the back. And the twin underlying JPEGs are actually preserved, so you can refocus these shallow shots after the fact. Yes, the P9's dual camera quote focusing system is a software kludge, but it's a much better done kludge than the one on HTC's One M8, which was amateurish beyond belief. Focusing in all standard modes is pretty fast thanks to a combination of laser and phase detection autofocus. The Leica branding, by the way, is intended to inspire some confidence, and it does, though the lenses here aren't made by Leica at all, but rather just at a Leica-approved factory somewhere in China, so make of that what you will. There are also supposed to be a couple of Leica-inspired film modes, but on my review handset these were nowhere to be seen. Overall, though, the camera bar for smartphones is already set very high by the Galaxy S7, LG G4, G5 and the Lumia 950 range, and the P9 doesn't get remotely close to these competitors, as you might expect given the relatively small apertures and the lack of OIS. The front-facing camera is high resolution at 8 megapixels and proved very competent. A video capture maxes out at 1080p, although with stereo audio, 1080p is not a showstopper in my book, given that this is still everyone's preferred resolution, let's face it, out in the real world. But with no facility to, for example, extract 8 megapixel stills from 4K video or to match the bullet point specs of most 2015 flagships, the P9's looking weaker than it should be in this area. The lack of OIS isn't an issue when shooting video, since there's good digital stabilization, but it's inexplicably turned off by Huawei by default. Go figure. The front of the Huawei P9, though pretty, is unremarkable in 2016. The screen tech used is quoted as IPS Neo, designed to stop backlight leakage and to approximate the contrast levels from AMOLED screens. It does this well indoors. The default dark theme here on the P9 looks stunning. Outdoors and sunlight contrast isn't as good as on the Samsung and Microsoft flagship competition, but the P9 screen is still perfectly usable. I'm just being a bit picky. The 1080p resolution looks low for a flagship, but remember this is LCD, not AMOLED, so the screen pixels are in full RGB layout, no pentile here, so 1080p is absolutely perfect on the P9 with a 5.2-inch diagonal. On to the engine used inside the P9 though. The chipset used here is one of Huawei's own, the Kirin 955. It's in the same sort of performance bracket as a Snapdragon 810, but it's hard to benchmark exactly. With 3 GB of RAM on the review handset, though, it flies. In many days of testing, I can't remember a single stutter. The P9 in some parts of the world apparently gets 4 GB of RAM as well as a 64 GB internal disk, this one's 32, along with the option to use dual SIMs, but then you lose micro SD. It's all a bit complicated. As intimated earlier, battery life is great with the largest capacity cell and the usual variety of Huawei power modes here: performance, smart and ultra power saving. 99% of the time smart is used and is fine, and games and HD are also okay. You'd have to be desperate for every last ounce of horsepower in a game in order to need performance. Ultra power saving is naturally enough about when your phone is almost out of power and you're exhausted and you're out and about and need to eke out every last milliamp hour. Here only basic telephony and messaging is allowed, along with a basic single home screen offering the same. There's also a slightly odd extra power saving mode, ROG, R-O-G, in which the entire device is switched to 720p. The idea is that this will keep battery drain down when playing games, but the mode isn't quick to apply. You need to basically restart the device, doesn't save that much power, and the main curiosity is to see what 720p resolution would look like on a 5.2-inch screened Android phone. As you might expect, you can definitely start to see pixels at 720p, and shows again why 1080p here was the optimal choice. Huawei's EMUI skin over stock Android keeps improving. Of course, this is version 4.1. Every new device and update brings a little bit of polish here, a few extra functions there. The interface changes are pretty painless, aside from the following of the iPhone and iOS by not having an application drawer. Instead, all app icons are on the home screens or home screen folders. Most people will be fine with this, I suspect. There's no real reason why any normal user needs a separate UI area for application icons, as iPhone users have found, for example. Even power users will find that a few minutes of folder organization is sufficient to get them up and running and productive. EMUI supports up to 18 home screens, but no one will get close to this if they want to stay sane. One annoyance from other non-Nexus Android phones persists here, though: the use by a manufacturer of their own applications while being contracted by Google to also include the Google versions. I understand the practical and legal reasons, but it's confusing for the new users. So we get 2 calendars, as here, right next to each other. Gallery as well as photos, music as well as play music, WPS Office as well as Google Drive and the Docs, Sheets, etc. You get the idea. We've seen Huawei's phone manager here before and it works just as well. I'm firmly against needing commercial third-party software fulfilling a cleaning and optimizing role on Android. But when the task is written by the manufacturer and included right from the factory, then it's easy to be more lenient with such software, even for an Android purist. Yes, users should know how to manage their own applications and storage, but hey, geeks don't have to use this, and other people will probably find Phone Manager a godsend. Huawei's also traditionally been keen on applications being closed as much as possible, all in a bid to prolong battery life. Some system applications are protected against auto-closing, usually while the screen is turned off, for example. But you can add your own to this protected list through the wonderfully simple UI addition to the multitasking carousel of a slight downwards nudge on any relevant or important applications. These then acquire a padlock symbol and will stay open as long as there's enough RAM. EMUI even remembers your protected status for each application, even after restarting the phone. There's no OK Google voice support by default, but you do get OK ME. Eh? It's very limited to seemingly only handling calling and asking the phone, where are you? To get the full Google voice stuff, you'd have to install the Google Experience Launcher, I suspect. Finally, Magazine Unlock brings up a different image every time you see the lock screen, kind of keeping the phone as fresh as possible. It's really rather clever. Though with the speed of fingerprint unlocking, for example here, by the back sensor, you'll never actually see the images, making the lock screen itself almost, well, irrelevant. Maybe the lock screen will go the way of the app drawer in time. I don't want to seem too down, though, on the Huawei P9. If this was an Honor device, that's Huawei's direct-to-consumer brand, and put out at, say, £300, then I'd consider it great value for money and a top buy. At £450 though, including VAT in the UK, it's not far off top-tier devices which outgun it in terms of screen, imaging, speaker, performance, brand, and so on. The P9 won't set the world on fire at this price, mid-2016, and that's a shame.